Perfect. Okay, so let's start with some logistics, like I said. This coming Thursday, that is the 29th of October, we will have our second CSI Psychology Colloquium. And it's going to be the same time as the one 2 weeks ago from 2:30 until 4:30 club hours. And it's going to be about applying to graduate school. So those of you who are planning perhaps to apply to a master's program should make an effort to attend. It's the usual two-step procedure. You have to register first, and here's the link. And once you're registered, then you'll get the Zoom credentials, the link and the password. And it's going to be run by my three young colleagues, Ellen G. Denton, Jennifer Wagner, and Leora Yetnikov. So Ellen G. and Jennifer have been with us about 6 years maybe. Leora has been with us for 4, which means all three of them are young and not that far away from grad school. They will be very useful. I assume that there will be maybe a couple of students as well who are currently either master's or PhD students. So please attend if you can, of course. Jeremiah is also outside, huh? How about that? Maybe I should go outside too. Oh, you're together. Fantastic. All right.
We're all hanging out.
Perfect. That's group work. I like that. Okay, great. So that's that. I have posted, I think, 3 activities for you. I may be able to post another one, but not until tomorrow. As always, please remember that you need to accumulate participation points. And Cedric is with you too, all 3 of you? My goodness, that's really good group work. I expect to see some good results from you guys. Is it accidental or is it intentional? Intentional, okay.
It was intentional.
Have you started doing observation together maybe? Is that the point? Oh, okay, good boys and girls. Good job. All right. So again, I remind you that you need to make an effort to accumulate participation points. Having said that, you must be aware of the fact that I submitted my midterm evaluations last week, and there were 3, okay, maybe 2 categories of people. People who have issues with academic performance. That's one category, and people who have issues with participation. And participation, what I mean by participation is participation points. And like I said before, I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, but let me say that I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. 8 people who have no participation points, 0. Now that might be a problem. So please do as much as you can. Like I said, you can be creative. You can do other things that are not posted as learning activities. You can do anything that's related to the topic of the class. Right. Finally, the observation plans. So I have heard from groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I got somebody else like now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, and 11. So the groups that I haven't heard anything are 6, 9, and 10. If you are one of those groups, remember you need an observation plan that has to be signed by me before you can go on and collect your data. And your data are due, gulp, a week from today, which means there is no time. So please, please send me something. I promise to turn it around and send it back to you. There are a couple of things that everybody had to sort of struggle with. One is the coding scheme that you need before you go into the field. Obviously, I assume the coding scheme is going to be on your phone, but it has to be there. And that's a very simple coding scheme. I sent you for those of you who sent me the observation plans, I sent you the sample coding scheme from the parking lot study. They have multiple variables. You only have two. So it's going to be very, very easy for you to create a coding scheme and use it. So all you have to do is, if you have your predictor variable, you have two values. So you're going to click on one of them for each. So think of your columns in your little table as your variables, and think of your rows as your participants. So whenever there is a cell that intersects between the two, that's where you click. All right, so do that. And finally, you need to have a research article, right? Again, some people sent me something, I looked at them and I suggested other things, or I said, okay, that looks good. Without the research article, you won't have an introduction. So that has to be done too. Okay. Any pressing questions about um, observation plan? Today would be a good day, and we will, on Thursday, we will work on assignment 2. So sampling stuff that we will talk about today is just today. And on Thursday, we'll talk about this new format, because it's going to be now an experimental, not experimental, an empirical report versus the essay that you wrote for assignment 1. So the structure of the APA components is different from the first one. So we'll need to do that, because soon, right, you will have by November 17th, you'll have your last quiz, which is going to be on APA style. So if you don't learn that, that quiz is not going to be easy for you. And to remind you that your quiz 4 on chapter 8 was coming Monday, just before the election. So get it out of the way as soon as you can. Chapter 8 is not my favorite, and I'm sure it's not going to be your favorite either. So spend some time learning about it and make sure that you tackle this quiz a little bit before the deadline, in case, as always happens, there are issues with your Blackboard or your internet. Okay, goody. Let's move on. So we are starting with sampling. In fact, you guys could do some sampling in your observation. Not that I'm asking you to do so, but it's something that should be obvious to you. Yes, definitely, Jenny. The question from Jenny is, can we have more than one research article for assignment 2? Absolutely. If you want to be a real researcher, Jenny, minimum is 20. Would you like to do that? But of course, 2 is fine and more is fine. So sometimes you may have a very general article about the first paragraph, about the topic, the general topic, where there are some numbers. So imagine that you were writing something about autistic children, you would have some statistics. You would say whatever the percentage of children in the United States are diagnosed with autism, or whatever the new term that we're using these days. And this information, of course, has to be documented. So if you have an article, bingo. The research article that I mentioned is the one from the second paragraph, or third, depends how much you're going to write, where it's now going to be more about your topic. So if it's, cell phone use, there's plenty of articles on cell phone use. But please, please, people, Remember that your research article has to be a psychology article. Okay, maybe that's too much. Social science article. It cannot, please listen to me, hear me. It should not be medical article. It should not be coming from psychiatry, epidemiology, JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, or anything else that has the word medical in it, because it's wrong for this class. And that was the problem for so many assignments. Number one, okay, we are in the psychology class. We're doing psychology claims, not medical stuff. Good. So keep these questions coming if you need me to talk about them. So let's start with this first four kind of questions. The difference between populations and samples. Why are some samples biased and others aren't? How do we get a representative sample? And why sometimes we don't care. We can have an unrepresentative sample and still be okay. Okay, so the book talks about these three things: a population, a sample, and census. And also a population of interest, but it's slightly different from these three. Okay, so it's something that we use in research methods as well as using it in psychology, psychological statistics. So when you go to 266, you'll be looking at more technical definitions of samples and probability. So a population is basically everybody, right? So if we have close to 8 billion people on this earth, that's the entire population of our planet. Then we can look at populations of different countries. You know, in the States, we have about 340 million people. If you look at Russia, it's about 150 million people. If you look at China, it's 2.5 billion, and so on. All of these are populations. Of course, it would be kind of interesting to study the entire population. That's what census is. A census is a study that studies every single population member. Now, we are now in the process of finishing Census 2020. The idea is to have every single person who is in the United States right now, regardless of the status, that is a citizen, a green card holder, a perhaps tourist, if somebody was stuck behind in this country, or illegal immigrants or legal immigrants or whoever they are, everybody should participate. And that would give a census. Of course, that never happens. There's plenty of people that do not participate for many reasons. So usually we don't look at census, we look at the population. And then again, almost never we can have the entire population to be taken into the account in a particular study. So in this case, it's mostly all about frequency claims, right? So what we settle for is samples. And the sample obviously is a proportion of the population. And this proportion of the population has to be representative, and by definition, it has characteristics of that population. So to be considered a sample. Again, there's plenty of examples. Let's think about a population of CUNY undergraduate students. We have almost 200,000, a bit more than that, of undergraduate students within the CUNY system, because we have 23 plus campuses. We have online campuses as well. So this is the population. So we want to know something about this population. We cannot, nobody has the resources to do census. So you have to do a sample. So what could be a sample? Well, it could be a sample of a particular campus. Let's say College of Staten Island. That would be a sample of CUNY undergraduate students. But again, that's 14,000 people. Who's going to do that? Then we can say, all right, we could maybe only look at freshmen, people who just joined the CSI, and see how they are doing. Even that is perhaps way too much. So we can continue to go down in numbers to settle on a sample. Okay, so that's the definition. A sample is a proportion of a population. So these are not only research methods terms, but statistical terms. So when we do statistics, we always use samples because, again, we don't have access to the entire population. And that's where this inferential component comes from, because we are trying to infer from the sample what the population is like, what the population does. So you guys, when you're doing your observation, will be looking at a sample, and your sample is tiny, right? I'm asking you to do 10 observations per group member. So in groups of 3, it's going to be 30. In groups of 2, it's going to be even fewer, 20. Yes. So the whole idea is for you to try to do it sort of randomly, right? Of course, if we were to use some of the techniques described in the textbook, we would have to set up a sample, let's say about 100 people, and then decide which of these, a third of these 100, you will observe. But again, this is not something that's easily achievable, especially under current circumstances. So we will assume that you will be just observing people over a period of time. All right, so the idea is that the sample has to represent a population, because otherwise, whatever is going to be characteristic of that sample is not going to be characteristic of the population. And then the whole research goes down the drain. Okay. Continuing within the same line, the attributes of the population are present in the sample. So if we look at, let's say, racial composition of undergraduate students, it should, if we are interested in how well different races are represented in CUNY undergraduate population, we have to imagine or make sure that whatever the racial composition of New York City is, this racial composition should be replicated in a sample. That is, if you're going to use a particular, we so far, I mean, the College of Staten Island, we so far are the whitest college within the CUNY system. It's changing. It's been changing in front of my eyes, but still. And we have other colleges that are majority of students are either Hispanic, like in Lehman College, or mixed, like Queens or Brooklyn College. So if we go for the fact that undergraduate CUNY population represents New York City, it has to be of approximately the same composition. Only then we can generalize from the sample to the population. Again, try to memorize these things, sort of lodge them into your head, because that will help you into 66. Into 66, you will be constantly juggling the difference between samples and populations, because again, that's how inferential statistics, statistical tests work. Okay, so here is the idea behind representative and non-representative or biased sample. And it's that part is relatively easy, right? So here are some of the examples from the textbook for you. So if you want to know what Democrats are thinking, okay, if you want to know what people are thinking about different parties, if you are going to recruit from people who came to the Democratic convention, you're going to be getting a biased sample. By definition, these people are Democrats. So if you want to, because they are at the convention, if you want to make sure that your representative sample is indeed representative, then you're going to go and get all the registered Democrats in this state, and then find a way of doing random sampling of these people, not the ones who are at the convention, but only the ones who are registered in the entire state. So that, I mean, it's very intuitive. It's very easy to understand. Now, here's another example. Drivers, right? Of course, you can talk to the drivers who are paying for parking. They are drivers by definition. But there are people who have driver's licenses, but maybe drive rarely or don't park where you have to pay. So in this case, again, it's going to be this cumbersome way of getting the list of all registered drivers. Of course, there are many, many ethical challenges on this way, and then trying to get a sample of the drivers to participate in your survey. And all of this is incredibly time consuming. Or the example for us, okay, would be to ask students in a particular class what they think of the class. That's going to be biased versus getting perhaps a much larger sample of the students that this particular faculty member taught and ask them what they think about this person, right? So, but again, a biased sample is not necessarily a bad sample. It has its virtues. But when we are talking about certain things, and that should be something that you can understand now. Remember when we talked about different variables and scales, when we talked about a continuous variable or continuous variables, we know that they can be measured in two scales. Does anybody remember what these scales are? Okay, well, we know 4 scales. How should I ask? Kim, do you remember any of the 4 scales that we discussed? Mm, it's quiet out there today. All right. Eileen, how about you? One of the scales, 1 out of 4. Does anybody remember? Thomas? Okay, thank you, Thomas. Yay! 1 is nominal. Okay, good. Who can give me another one? Romaine? Ordinal. Yes, thank you, Rita. Uh-huh.
Going to be ratio.
Ratio. Okay, good. And interval. Yay! Okay, thank you, guys. I'm happy that there are people out there. So which 2 scales are used to measure continuous variables, variables that are numbers? That should be easy now. Vanessa, nominal is for categorical variables. Yes, Eileen, ratio, perfect. And what's the other one? Interval, yes, perfect. So here's the thing, right? The difference between interval and ratio scales is whether that variable has an absolute 0, which means does it exist? All right. So when we talk about things, scales, assessments, instruments, all of these, something that we created. We, when I say we, I mean humans, right? We created a scale for IQ. We created a scale for, personality stuff. Whenever it is something that we believe and we have a conceptual definition of something that's not physical, right? Like beliefs and attitudes. In this case, right, there is no absolute 0 because something is a 0 on the scale doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Okay, so you could use the scales when you are thinking of interval scale, because you're looking at people's attitudes. And most of the stuff that is described in the textbook in this particular chapter are these studies of frequency claims that are about beliefs and attitudes. And beliefs and attitudes are so difficult to define. It's easy to define the shoe size. It's easy to define, tip, okay, an absolute zero. But when it is your attitudes, that's really hard. And that becomes an issue because most of the questions and scales that are administered in these studies are of the interval scale type. Okay, so it's easy. Try to remember that whenever somebody's talking to you about an assessment that was created by psychologists, it always likely will be on an interval scale with sort of um, fuzzy representations, so to speak. Okay. All right. So there's a question, right? When is a sample biased? I mean, the textbook gives you a bunch of examples of when it is biased. And the two major ways of sort of getting a biased sample are, well, here I put them as three, but you can think of one and two as sort of being the same. It's somebody who is easy to contact, or somebody who the researcher finds easy to contact, right? That's a little different. Researcher perhaps being, a particular person, a particular team. And the second way of getting a biased sample is by having people volunteer, that is, self-select. All right, so let's talk about these two. Again, this is not the most difficult stuff that is from this chapter. So if we look at the chart, flow chart, something that we like doing. So here is our population. A population of interest. So let's say we'll take, I don't know, what should we take? A population of undergraduate students in this country who use Rate My Professor site. Okay, so it's the entire million plus whatever of undergraduate students who go to that site. Okay, and a bias sample will be when students in the class self-select themselves to do that. It's not a required step. Even when you are given institution-based evaluation forms, the response rate can be very, very low. So in this case, again, these are certain students that decide that they want to do and rate. A lot of other students use it to look this particular professor's ratings, but people who actually do the rating are a minority of all the students. So it is a biased sample. And it is because it's biased, it's not going to be representative for that particular faculty. Remember what the table on the previous slide showed. It showed that to get some information that's indeed representative, and samples like this, you would need to take this faculty's teaching over a few years and several semesters, and then reach out to these students and find a way to compel them to go to Rate My Professor and do the rating. Okay, so it's often the case that certain types of students decide to do that and then others don't. And then we'll talk in the second half of today's session about unbiased samples and how we can achieve one of those. Now, when we do research in our labs, some of you guys attended that research introduction to CSI psychology labs 2 weeks ago. We often also go for bias samples because we have access to our subject pool, which is required for participation to every student who takes Psych 100. Okay, so we'll come back to that when we look at how to achieve an unbiased sample. So what we do when we have students participate in our experiments and our studies is we use the convenience sample, right? Here we are. Again, this COVID situation is a little different, but in general, here we are. We have students available to us, easy. They also are required to participate. And that's how we get our participants. That's especially important for those of you guys who become independent study students, because then you run your own little studies for your honors thesis and you need participants. And trying to get them through your friends and social media sites is not always easy. It's much, much easier to go to Sona system, open up your study and just get participants to come and do it, especially now if you can have an online study, even better, because you don't, once you have designed it and deployed it, there's nothing else that you need to do. People will just come and do it. Of course, there are issues with not supervising them. But again, it's a convenience sample, right? It's a sample that is available to us because we are together on this campus. And that has been a very sort of important source of data for research that's being done in at the universities and colleges, just because we have this population of students available to us. And there are people who have started in the past 20 years to say that this is not a very good thing, because if you're looking at students, you may be getting participants that are more educated than the general public or the population of interest, or maybe, younger than the general population or the population of interest. That's certainly is true. Something that's very obvious now, even in just a few years, is the fact that landlines are becoming obsolete. So imagine a standard way of doing these polls, surveys would be to call a landline, right? And then ask the person who happens to pick up the phone to, answer a few questions. But we know what's happening with landlines. So how about we do a little poll? So go to your participants manager. Remember, you have a toolbar at the bottom. So what I would like you to do is to click yes if you personally, in your home, or if you're living with somebody or with your parents, if you have a landline, click yes. And if you don't have a landline, click no. Okay, well, we have 15 people and we'll have 9 votes, but Maya Well has one. Okay. All right. 6 and 4. Okay. So I assume that most people who said landline yes is because you live with older relatives, maybe your parents, or like Jeremiah says, his mother, right? Or grandmother? Okay. But grandmother. Okay, good. Um, So one could imagine that if you're doing a survey of younger people who live by themselves, almost none of them has a landline these days. So what's going to happen in such a situation? All right, is represented on these two figures. So look at, this is 2014, I think. Yeah, it is 2014. So look at the figure on the left. And what you can see is that from 2007 until 2014, which is only 7 years, right? The percentage of people in the age group of 25 to 29, I'm sure some of you are in that group, grew from 30%, basically doubled. No landline. So this age group, millennials, are living without landlines. Some of you are probably in the other group, 18 to 24, also doubled, right, from 27 to 57. Again, a little bit more than that. There's a big jump in the slightly older folks from 30 to 34. This jump is extremely high from 16 to 64. And you can see that as age progresses, only 15% of retirees do not have a landline. The rest do. So if the poll is conducted over landline, you're going to be getting a biased sample, because most of the people, even if they of course respond to your questions, are going to be 45 and older, right? So you're not going to be getting a lot of young people. Now, if you look at the graph on the right, figure on the right, you can see that not having a landline is associated with less wealth. That is, people who are at the poverty level or near poverty level overwhelmingly do not have landlines. But people who are wealthier still do, although the number is 40% of those who don't and 60% who do. Again, of course, one would say, okay, let's do a lot of our polls on cell phones. How much, guys, do you like having pollsters calling you on your cell phone? That is an aberration. Nobody wants to hear uh, from a pollster on your cell phone. So it's becoming almost impossible to do polls and surveys like this over the phone. So there's got to be other ways, and the internet is the answer to this issue. All right, so we have to be, and technology changes so fast. Who knows what's going to happen within the next few years. All right, here is an interesting another survey. This is about road rage and aggression. Let's have a look at these wonderful types of behaviors. Tailgate on purpose, yell at another driver, honk to show annoyance or anger, make angry gestures, block another vehicle from changing lanes, cut off another vehicle on purpose, get out of the vehicle to confront another driver and ram or bump another vehicle on purpose. Okay, so let's go back to our, I'm going to clear the first one. So if you have ever engaged in one of these wonderful behaviors, no matter which one, click yes. And if you have been an absolute wonderful driver, then click no. Okay. Right. So we have 4 people who have been engaged in one of those behaviors and 2 people who did not. Now 4 to 3. Come on, guys, there's 15 of you. Okay, minus me, 14. Let's get more. the toolbar is in the participants.
I don't drive, and for when I do,
Uh-huh.
I still don't have the confidence in tailgating others.
Will you scream at somebody does
I
something?
would never tailgate. That is
I mean, they could
scary.
always break. They could always break, and then they'll be the,
That's what
you
I'm
know, the
saying.
a-holes. But once I start driving, I know I will. But until then, I will not.
I would never be able to tailgate.
Oh my
I
goodness.
do be yelling at people though, but with my windows up.
You haven't seen that on, not necessarily while driving, but on our parking lots. I've seen that several times in my time at CSI when there is a parking lot, somebody's pulling out, two cars are trying to get in, they jump out of the car and they start screaming at each other. This is my spot. Of course,
I've seen that before.
the language
It's kind
is
of funny.
much worse. In fact, I have to tell you, when we used to get this newspaper, when there was a newspaper on campus, I don't know what happened to it now, they would publish the reports of the minor misdemeanors, misbehaviors, and there will be almost always a story of a fist fight on one of the parking lots. Although, of course, it's not quite driving, it's just parking. Okay, 6-3. All right, you guys are honest. Okay, that's good. I'm very docile. I don't scream or yell. I'm just saying, come on, you must be joking. Something like that. Okay, good. There is another example here about how you'll position your, car seat for your child. And if you think of your future children, you can try to see which of the three categories you're going to be in. Of course, we know that a rear facing is safer than forward facing, but as you can see, 23 people will still do it. Will position the car seat forward facing. Yeah. Okay, let's do a little exercise. So what I'm asking you to do, again, in the chat, might be, maybe not. We can do each. Okay, let's continue with the participants manager, because I think it works okay. So let's look at the first example. So I'm asking you to decide which of the following claims is a representative sample rather than a bias sample, likely to be essential. So let's look at the first one. A political poll predicting who will win a governor's race. If you think it's important for it to be representative, click yes. If you think that that's not necessarily needs to be representative, could be a bias, then click no. Okay, interesting. So there are 3 people, or 4, who think that a biased sample will be okay. Anybody from these 4 people would be willing to defend?
Wait, never mind. I didn't know that you meant that. I'm changing my answer.
I thought she meant it would be biased.
Of course. Now, good.
It's
You
back to
achieved
yes.
back to yes. So the yes is representative, the no is non-representative. Okay, so now you guys are correct. Of course, we want a representative sample. Otherwise, how will we know who these people are going to vote for? Okay, let's do number 2. Let me clear this one. So number 2 is online readers' ratings of a recently released film. If it should be representative, click yes. If it can be biased, click no. Good. Yes. Remember that, if you rate a movie, I mean, nothing hinges on that. It's your personal opinion, and you may not like a particular movie for different reasons that have nothing to do with being representative. So in this particular case, you can have a biased sample. That's not going to be a problem. Excellent. Good job, guys. Let's get rid of this. Let's do number 3. Estimating school achievement from a sample of, I can't see, test scores from 10 district schools in order to evaluate which of the 10 schools is the highest achieving school. Do we want our sample to be representative? Click yes. If you think it could be biased, click no. So are we going to select these schools in a special way, or we don't care? Good. Everybody says it has to be representative. Absolutely, because it's an evaluation. So it has to be representative. Otherwise, you can get a school from a rich zip code versus a school from a poor zip code in the same. Shh. I have a chinchilla who is barking right now. All right, let's do number 4. Let me clear this. And this is evaluating the quality of a day's surfing conditions by asking surfers on the local beach. If you think that the sample should be representative, click yes. If you think it could be biased, click no. Okay, all right, so we have 9 people, 10 who say no and 3 who say yes. The correct answer is no. We don't really care, right? Because nothing, again, hinges on how representative that sample is. We are at this beach location. What they think is their personal thinking. It doesn't do anything to the actual quality of surfing. Facts. Yes, very good. Okay, easy stuff because you guys did quite well. Perfect. All right. Okay. So here is again the same flow chart that shows us how we can go about getting biased samples and how we can get about getting unbiased samples. Of course, it's almost always the case that we want to have an unbiased sample, but sometimes, like what you just saw in 2 examples, we don't really care. Okay, so how do we achieve a representative sample? The most, well, it's not the easiest, but the most obvious one is random sampling, and it has to be simple. So let's say we'll look at the example of our class, right? I needed you to be in groups of 3. Oops, let's go back and stop sharing for a second. I needed you to be in groups of 3 without imposing any restrictions on how you would self-select yourselves into these groups. So one way of doing that for me would be to go to a research randomizer, which is illustrated in the textbook. I'm going to show you how it works. Okay, so here I say, well, there is 33 students in the class and I want groups of 3, which means I want 11 groups. How many people in each group? Well, I will say 3. And what is my range? Well, obviously, the lowest is 1 if there is somebody in class, and highest is 33. I would like each number to be unique, although that presents a bit of a difference, a bit of a problem. You'll see in a second. And the other 2 are just additional parameters. So I'm saying randomize now. Okay, so when I do that, do you guys see the results? Okay, good. So imagine that group number 1, according to this randomizer, should consist of 3 students. If you guys are in the alphabetical order, which is how rosters come, student number 2, 6 and 31 will be in that group. So I'm going to look up my syllabus, I'm sorry, my roster, and student number 2 is Jackie, and student number 6 is Monica, and student number 31 is Stephanie. So you guys would have been in a group according to this randomizer. And so on. So second group would be 15, 17, 29. Note, for example, that group 6 and group 7 will include the same person. Number 23 is repeated twice. So one would have to play with that a little bit. But in general, you will get a complete random assignment of students to the group. And I've tried that, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how people get together in a group. It doesn't make any difference. Okay, let's get back to where we were. We were here. Oh, no, sorry. That's again the site. We want the PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so that's the randomizer. So if you were to, perhaps if we were to do our observation very, very properly, and we would say, okay, you need 30 people, let's select a sample of 100, and then we would run the randomizer that will give us 30 random numbers out of 100. Let's say we have these numbers, 2, 6, 32. Then we will start observing people in whichever area we are, let's say in the Staten Island Mall, and we'll say, okay, person number 1 doesn't get observed because we don't have that number on the list. But person number 2 is. So then we will observe that person. Then we will skip 3, 4, and 5, and then person number 6 gets observed too. You can imagine how labor intensive that is. So we don't want to do that, but technically we could. That would be simple random sampling. Beautiful because it's totally random, it's totally probabilistic, but our life is not the way it is. So this sampling is called probabilistic, probability sampling, because of a probability of each person in the population to be included into that sample. All right, and these are the 5 types of probability sampling, and I just talked to you about simple random probability sampling, which is great, but is very time consuming. Okay, it's 5:33. Let's take a break until 5:40 and then come back so you guys can have a smoke. Oh, whatever.
Miss Karina, we never knew chinchillas bark.
Ah, okay. I will try to catch him and show him to you at the end of the break and see.
He's just bouncing around the house?
He's bouncing around the house. You must be kidding me. I mean, he shits like crazy. No, of course he's in the cage.
Oh, I thought you said try to catch him as if he's just bouncing around.
I'll try to catch him in his cage, which is also
a
problem.
Shit's a lot. All right, I look forward to seeing
All right,
him.
I'll see you in a few minutes.
Using professor. For Tusala. That's weird looking at my head from like so weird.
Jeremiah, she probably wants to go catch him.
Yes, we're saying it's so weird to look at my head turn like that. Ew. Ew.
I'm concerned to why the chinchilla barks.
Listen, it's not that strange. My aunt's cat barks.
Yeah, but the chinchilla shouldn't be in the cage like
Oh God. What am I doing with my life? I know, it's brick.
No, I had looked that term up because I have no idea what brick has to do with temperature. I'm not staying here, so. We're gonna. Oh, my mic is on.
Okay. How about this little guy?
Wait, does it have red eyes?
Interesting.
Oh, never mind.
Yes.
so freaking cute.
Look at the tail. Wow. Right. Let's see.
Would you say, like, is he like a dog? Do you get
No,
any
not
sense
at
of
all.
feelings from him?
Well, I do, but no.
He's like the size of me.
No, he's actually tiny. Let's see if he's interested.
So
He
nice.
loves almonds. I don't know if he's gonna eat one, but maybe he will. So these are used to be very popular for fur coats. Can you imagine? You need 250 of those.
I know.
One fur coat.
Poor things. They're probably going extinct.
Well, they come from Chile. They like living in they do live in the mountains. But the good thing about them is that they actually are very long living. Now, show it to your niece, Jasmine, or your sister who just ran by behind you.
My sister, she ran by to pick something up.
Call her so you can see a chinchilla.
Adi, Anthony, you want to see a chinchilla? A chinchilla. Look at it. Stop.
Look at its tail. See?
It looks like a rabbit. Uh-oh.
I got it.
Oh.
Get to it. Okay.
He's very cute, right?
Say goodbye. His name is Pepper. Say goodbye, Pepper.
Goodbye.
Bye, Pepper.
Good luck with it.
Okay. All right, here we go. He's back in the cage. Yes, I didn't know they bark until obviously I had the chinchilla.
What happened? Oh my god.
If you would have known he barked, would you still have gotten him?
Oh yeah, his barking is very mild. It's not like a dog. He's affectionate, but
Dog doesn't bark at all.
In his own way. I mean, he's a rodent. Rodents
Right.
are, he's like a rat.
Okay. Good luck with him then.
Well, the good thing is the reason why we have a chinchilla because we used to have hamsters, and if anybody has ever had a hamster, there are two problems with them. One is that they stink a lot, and then they also live very short life, about 1.5 years. So when we were on the hamster number 4, I said, that's it. I don't want any more hamsters.
I had a hamster like 2 years ago, and we had him on a high counter, and somehow like 2-3 times we just found him in my brother's room in the morning. I don't understand how he survived those falls.
That's right. They are escapists. But the problem is that they die so fast on you. So I told my daughter, I said, you want an animal? You've got to find somebody that lives longer than hamsters. And these guys live 20 years. What do you know?
I have 2 hamsters. They're my babies.
It's so hard to lose them. That's the problem.
Next class, I'll show you them because clearly I'm not home. So on Thursday, I'll show you.
Okay. What is the name of, how many of them do you have?
I have two of them.
And what are their names? Do they have names?
I have a girl. Her name is Lila.
Mhm.
And then I have a boy, and he's Hammy.
Interesting. All right. We look forward to seeing them. Hammy, like a hamster.
Yes. Hammy the hamster.
Okay. Let's get back to where we were. The chinchilla break is over.
Chinchilla break.
Well, I mean,
No,
we all are humans, right, guys?
Oh.
inside of your camera. Or that way.
Okay. So coming back to the probability sampling, again, remember probability is probability of being included into a sample. Again, it's a statistical term, but there is nothing sort of totally crazy about it. All right, so first non-simple random probability sampling is cluster, right? The textbook gives you an example of a cluster sample using colleges in this country, right? So if you want to do a cluster sampling of colleges, so what you will do, you will get a list of all the colleges, and then you will decide, let's say all the colleges in one state, you will decide on, let's say, I think the example was state of Pennsylvania, you get all the colleges. Out of those, you will get a list of colleges that will be clusters. All right, and then within these clusters, so if it's at 200 colleges, a cluster might have 10, and then you will select these 10, and then you will do your sampling and ask questions of the students in that cluster. Okay, so cluster of course is useful because it allows us to spend less resources and time on doing our sampling. And we will assume that if we do it correctly by randomly selecting 10 colleges out of 200, we're going to get a representative sample because, you know, we did not choose colleges in one area, we chose them across the entire state by randomly selecting 10. Okay, so the next one, I think there was a question like this on one of your tests, is multi-stage sampling. There it's just, you have a couple of steps in addition to, right, so the example that they're giving here again would be, okay, two random samples, a random sample of clusters, and then a random sample of people within those clusters. Okay, so first clusters are selected randomly, then participants for your study will be selected randomly within those clusters. Again, we will assume that it's going to be representative as long as both steps are random. They allow you to use this random number generator to choose college number 18, college number 4, and college number 37, and whatever that might be. The textbook also describes a potentially 3-step multi-stage sampling. Again, not necessarily something that we need to worry about. All right, next one is stratified. So that is an interesting question. What is the difference between cluster sampling and stratified sampling? Well, here, remember, cluster is random selection of clusters. Clusters meaning a bunch of entities together, right? Let's say 10 colleges. In stratified random sampling, we use strata, which is a plural of logging me out of Zoom. Come back, Jeremiah, when you can. We have to have a stratum, right? A stratum is a particular subset of whatever your participants are, colleges or people, that are united by a special characteristic, versus cluster where it's completely random. Now here we have a special characteristic. So for example, if we want to study well, not a very cheerful topic. If we want to study prostate cancer survivors, well, we have to look at men. And that's going to be a strata or stratum that we will use. And then within that, we will use maybe clusters within the state and then within particular hospitals and so on. All right, so the difference between cluster and strata is this demographic specificity for stratum, which does not exist in the cluster sampling. In cluster, we don't care. Everybody is eligible within those clusters. In stratified sample, our sample needs to meet particular requirements. If we want to, again, we want to study gender effects, we have to make sure that we have men and women. If we are studying something like postpartum depression and new mothers, it's going to be a stratum of young women who had children recently, right? We can't include every woman. That would be cluster sampling. Another interesting point that book discusses has to do with oversampling. And that's because certain groups of population are rare. So what we want to do is then to make sure that they are not just represented, but they actually are overrepresented in our sample. Because if we were just to be representative of the population, then it's going to be very few of them. So the example, I think, was the East Asians or South Asians in Canada, somewhere, right? But think about any other example that you might want to do. Let's say you want to uh, study, and this is what my colleague, Dr. Gillespie Lynch, she's studying. She's studying young adults who are students at CSI and who have autism, Asperger's, or anything that would preclude them from being more successful in the social interactions within college. Now, if you were to take an equal sort of sampling of typical students and students with this disability, it's going to be 96-4. But we want to oversample these people because we want to know what their experience is in college. So we would want to, maybe if we can get 100 participants, we will have to have 50 neurotypical students like you guys and 50 special students. We will oversample them because they're so rare. We want to make sure that their voice is heard. And finally, we have what's known as systematic sampling. It's really, there's nothing fancy about it. It's just the computer is used to generate numbers and ranges of these numbers. Again, nothing that we need to worry about, but something that people who do a lot of these polls and surveys are concerned with. And then they can use systematic sampling where it will tell you, okay, start with your potential participant number 4 and then choose every 7th one after that. So participant number 11, participant number 18, participant number 25. Okay, that's going to be a systematic sampling because that interval, right, is systematic. Every 7th person studying or college studying from number 4. Again, that's the example from the textbook. And finally, as you can see that at the end of this section of chapter 6, you can combine some of these in a certain way to get you to where you want to get with your research question. Okay, so that's again the figure from page 131. These are the ones on the left. See that? Okay, these are the 5 probability sampling techniques that I just described to you guys. Okay, the one that we would like to have but can't is simple random. And then we're going to go through other possible sampling techniques depending on our question. Okay, in the remaining time, we'll focus now on non-probability sampling, which means a person's probability of being included in the sample is not really is not governed by probability. It's governed because we decide to do it this way. Let's see if I can make it clear by looking at some of the examples. All right. So, there's one point which the textbook makes some emphasis on making sure that you understand the difference. Now, when we talked about causal claims, let's see if anybody can make my day and tell me what are the 3 criteria for the causal claim. And I asked you to memorize that. There are 3 criteria that are characteristic of causal claims. Covariance. Thank you, Rita. Perfect. That's criterion number 1. We can do criterion number 2. Covariance means the 2 variables co-vary. They vary. When one changes, so does the other. Temporal precedence. Now, Rita is the only person who remembers. Yes. That means that our predictor variable or our independent variable has to precede our response variable or our dependent variable, because we need to establish causation. Now comes the third one. Okay, Rita, if you can do the third one. Internal validity. Perfect. Okay, and that's actually on the slide, right? So the difference between random sampling and random assignment has to do with this point. Only in causal claims that can only be tested in experiments, not in observations, not in polls, not in association claims that you guys will be testing in the observation, only in experiments where we manipulate the predictor variable, the independent variable, we can see the causality. And internal validity is equal to a random assignment. If you get your participants assigned to your conditions randomly, okay, then you will hopefully avoid the third variable problem, right? So the random assignment is assignment of participants to the conditions in the experiment randomly. While random sampling, of course, is not this, because random sampling is about frequency claims and association claims, where we're saying if we assign people randomly, if we select people randomly, we will increase external validity, which is one of the validities that we test in all 3 types of claims, in frequency, association, and causal claims, right? So random sampling is important for external validity. It means we can generalize to the entire population of interest from our sample. So unfortunately, yes, the terminology is a little bit confusing, but I hope it makes sense to you. So think of random assignment as only applicable to experiments, and you'll be fine, to the causal claims. Now we are ready to tackle the 4 sampling techniques that are not representative. But again, like I said, doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that they're different from the ones that we discussed in the representative sampling section. Okay, we already know what convenience sampling is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because if we are interested in things that we don't find vary too much among the population, so yes, let's take something like IQ. All right, IQ is obviously if you take a large amount of people, will be a normally distributed variable. So why would we want to go and do a representative sample of thousands of people when we know that if we can get a relatively small sample and we know that IQ is normally distributed, we're going to get it even in our convenience sampling. Okay, so you have to decide. So remember, when it comes to attitudes and beliefs, that's when convenience sampling may be a problem. But anything that's sort of standardized, physical, it's not an issue to have a convenience sample. So when we do cognitive stuff, reaction time experiments, accuracy, um, you know, foreign language learning abilities, all of this, we can use a convenience sample because it's going to be unnecessary to go to a representative sample. However, when we look at people's attitudes, what do they think about whether their children should be in dual immersion programs, bilingual, that becomes something that cannot be tested with a non-representative sample, because you need to not only include people who are immigrants who obviously are bilingual, so they want their children perhaps to be such, sometimes the other way around, versus monolinguals, which we still have more in this country than anywhere else. We need to sample both. When I do my research, I work a lot of bilinguals, but a special type of bilinguals. These are people that we call heritage speakers. They are the ones who grew up in families speaking a language other than English. Usually, such a family immigrated to the United States with the child either being very young or actually being born in the US. Again, I'm always curious about this. So let's go to our poll toolbar in Participants Manager. So if you guys speak a language that is spoken in your family in addition to English, obviously you all speak English, otherwise you would not have been in this college. So if you speak a family language, click on the yes button. If you only speak English, nothing else, then click the no button. Excellent. All right. Wow, we have a bunch of people who have a family language. All right. So I could work with you. It's going to be a convenience sample, but that's going to be enough because it's not a policy issue, right? It's an issue um, of sort of your demographic characteristics. So Jeremiah says, I speak one, but not the other two. So what are the three languages, Jeremiah?
Oh, Portuguese and Hebrew.
Oh, okay. Excellent. And the one that you speak is Spanish, right?
Spanish, and then there's Pacois in my family, but I don't really speak it that well. But that doesn't really count. It might.
Oh, that's interesting. Perfect. All right. So doing this kind of research with students is fine as long as you know that you're not studying these subjective attitudes and beliefs. I think I started telling you about this interesting point that was brought to our attention just a few years ago. Um, People who are interested in the sort of history of science started looking at experiments and studies in social sciences, and they realized that so many of them are conducted with white, educated, uh, I don't remember the entire abbreviation, but the abbreviation that they came up with was weird. So white, educated, I don't remember what it stands for. Yes, Stephanie. Go ahead. See you Thursday. R stands for rich and D stands for developed countries. So most of the bulk of body of research in psychology over the last 50 years, more than that, 70 years, has been conducted with this group of people. How often do we go to other countries? How often do we go to people who have no college degree? How often do we go to uh, people who are poor? Ask them questions. That's not going to be a convenience sampling, right? So a lot of work in the past 10, 15 years in psychology was dedicated to overcoming this weird bias and including more of a actual community participants. All right, purposive sampling, again, very simple stuff when we have a purpose. That is, we need certain participants that meet certain characteristics. So the example that they're using here, let me see what they call, let's say they want to do research with smokers. Well, so you have to find smokers, which is maybe not so easy in this country anymore. So the idea is you would recruit your participants in tobacco stores. You'll have flyers, you have direct mailing to these people because you want to study those who smoke, right? So it's not going to be random because it's only people who smoke, but that is because of your research question. Snowball, you understand the metaphor, right? You start with one person, that person has connections, he or she recruits other people, and they have their connections, they recruit other people. I use that technique a lot because when I need my heritage speakers, obviously a lot of them hang out together. So if I get somebody who comes from a Russian family to participate in my experiment, I say, hey, do you know anybody else? Do you have some friends? And the answer is almost always yes. And they come in and they participate. And then if everything goes well, I ask them, they bring more. And that's how we often do research with children. Obviously, if you are looking at a particular age group, the child tends to have friends in the same age group. So then you could recruit by snowballing connections of that child. In my earlier years, when I started doing eye tracking, and we wanted to do an eye tracking experiment with children, and they were 4 to 5 year old age band, and my son at the time was 4. So I went to his daycare center and I talked to the director and then to the teachers, and we recruited a bunch of other kids from his school because we all were sort of in it together. So it worked very well. At the time when nobody did any eye tracking with children, so nobody knew how parents will respond to a request of having the children to participate. But if the child is together with my child and I'm saying it's fine, we already tested all of that, it becomes much easier. Finally, we have a quota sampling. We identify our population of interest. Let's say we want to study our autistic students, and then we set up a number of people that we will recruit. So we'll continue to work our recruitment magic until we reach that number. So let's say we want to get opinions of 50 students on the um, autistic spectrum disorder to ask them about the experience in college, and we say we want 50 of them. We will continue to do that until we get 50 people. Again, it's not going to be random, it's not going to be representative, but that will give us enough of information to answer the question that we have in mind. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. It's not particularly, again, difficult. All right. Because these are usually frequency claims, right? So the frequency claims are the ones that we investigate with the 2 types of validities. Again, that's chapter 3. It's foundational chapter for Morling's approach to research methods. So who can name the 3 claims? What are the 3 types of claims that we know? I'll have a little break. You guys will do a little bit of work. Causal, okay, thank you, Rita. Is anybody else besides Rita? Oh, Jenny, thank you. Frequency, Rita again, association, beautiful. Okay, then I'm gonna torture somebody. Let's say Irving. Can you tell me what are the let's do it again. What are the validities for frequency claims?
Wait, repeat that.
So, Irving, each claim can be interrogated with 4 types of validities, but not all 4 of them are applicable to every type of claim. So my question to you is, if we take frequency claims, the ones that only have one variable, what are the validities that we can interrogate for frequency claims?
I don't know.
Okay, that's going to be a problem. So you need to read chapter 3. Sadiru, what do you say? What are the validities that we can interrogate with frequency claims? Okay, Sadiru is probably hanging out. Okay, Vanessa, thank you. Okay, construct. So, Seaver, listen to my question. What are the validities that we can use to interrogate frequency claims? You're naming all 4 of them, but now what are the ones that are only applicable to frequency claims? So Vanessa said construct, perfect. What's the other one? External, beautiful. Okay, so what we're talking about, right, is construct validity of frequency claims. That is, if somebody says statistical potentially, yes, not always. If we want to interrogate construct validity of a behavioral claim, of a, sorry, frequency claim, right? And the frequency claim would be what this chapter starts with. So it says, 8 out of 10 pediatricians use Johnson & Johnson products on their own children. Okay? So how do we establish construct validity? Well, we need to know 8 out of 10 pediatricians. What does that mean? I mean, did they use the entire population of pediatricians in this country? So how many are there? There must have been thousands, right? So yeah, probably they didn't use the entire population of interest. They used some pediatricians. But how did they do that? Did they do it by state? Did they get a list of all pediatricians in the state of New York and then used some kind of a cluster sampling to reach to some of them? That would be construct validity. That is, how did they do the sampling to say that 8 out of 10? Here's another one. It's on page 180. It says 70% of Canadians felt well rested yesterday. You would say, well, wait a minute. Did they actually use the entire population of Canada? Of course not, right? That's going to be some kind of a sampling procedure. So the example here on the slide is the study that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, when the researchers gave to their participants digital recorders. And every 12 minutes, the recorder would go on and record for 30 seconds whatever the person was saying at the moment. Now, as you can see here, this is from the study which was published in Science, the most important journal, Science and Nature, the 2 main journals. They did the study from 1998 until 2004. The durations are here. And look at the sample sizes, right? So the first one was 27. The second one was tiny, it was 7, but they collected data for 10 days. The last one was 7 plus 4, 56 plus 56. It's 112 people. It's still a small sample, but it's a lot of data. Okay, so the question was, do women talk more than men? I hope you remember that question. And look at the data now. Again, we're not discussing how they calculated all of that by using the digital recorders, but these are the numbers. So women, on average, would produce 16,000 words a day, and men would produce 15,500 words a day. And what you have in the parentheses are standard deviations. Okay, so when they ran the statistical analysis on this, it turned out that this difference, 16,000 versus 15 and a half, is not significant, which means they answered their research question, do women talk more than men? And the answer is no. Both genders speak approximately the same amount. Interestingly, those of you guys who speak Spanish, there is a myth that Hispanics talk a lot. This is the Hispanic data. As you can see, 14,700 for women, 15,000 for men. Again, no difference. So regardless of whether you speak Spanish or English, there is no gender difference in the number of words spoken per day. So can we say that they have construct validity, that is that they selected their participants in such a way that it represents the population? Obviously, yes, right? Because they selected them completely randomly. Of course, people had to agree to wear the devices, but it's only a week or 4 days. It's not too bad. So construct validities for frequency claims is about sampling. Okay, and of course it's a priority because you want to make sure that whoever they sampled was either representative or didn't have to be representative, but was nevertheless useful. But external validity, whether you can generalize. So now we talked about English speaking participants versus Spanish speaking participants. What about, I don't know, who should we use? French. If we go to France, are we going to get the same results? So that would be a question of external validity. Can we generalize from the Americas into Europe? And sometimes, as long as we have the construct validity that the sampling was correct, it met the requirements of the hypothesis, we don't care about external validity. We have plenty of non-probability samples in the world. We have plenty of non-probability samples in research, such as life. And here is an interesting point. Again, Morling draws our attention to that because a lot of students, even after they've taken this class, will continue to say that sample size matters. That is, and I see that in papers all of the time. When you have to compare your data with the research article data, you would say, oh, but our samples was very small. It's not the point. Okay, the point is here. Large samples are not more representative than smaller samples. Look at this table. So this is what is known as margin of error. So if you are sampling, right, you then infer the results into the population of interest. So what happens is, in addition to whatever question you ask, there is also random sampling error, which is your personal characteristics. Maybe you're less talkative, or maybe you drink less caffeine, or maybe whatever it is. So if you have a small sample size, right? Let's say you're only going to ask 50 people. Then this margin of error, that is all these unpredictable differences among people, will be large, meaning that you will hear this as 50% plus minus 10. So 10%, of course, gives us a range from 40 to 60. Wow, that's a huge range. If we still if we double the number of participants, our margin of error continues to remain relatively large. Now, if we have 200 participants, our margin of error diminishes by 3%. That's much better. But look what happens around 1,000 participants. So now the margin of error is really small. It's only 3%. So if you say that 45% of people voted for this particular governor, whatever, plus minus 3 margin of error, it means 48 to 42. So it's a range of 42 to 48. And increasing it by another 500 people does not do anything to decrease the margin of error. Doubling, that is from 1,000 participants to 2,000 participants, still is not worth it. That's why when you look at all these polls that you either have participated or will be participating, this 100 and 1,500 people is usually the sweet spot. That's where most polls will stop, because increasing the number beyond that doesn't really do anything in terms of decreasing the margin of error. So it's not the size, right, that matters. It because that's a statistical concept. It's the research questions you're asking. That if you need a representative sample because you're looking at beliefs and attributes and stuff like that, attitudes, then you need a more representative sample. But things that are the same in the population, you can stop at 1,500 and you'll be just fine. Okay, and at this lovely place, if you have any questions, ask me. Otherwise, can you talk? Okay, good, Victoria. So stay behind. Otherwise, people, the class is over. And I'll see you all on Thursday. And you want to be here on Thursday because we'll be talking about assignment 2. And that's going to be important.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jasmine.
On
Yeah, I do
Thursday,
have the question.
So stay behind, but let's mute others because otherwise I can't hear anything. Go ahead, Jasmine.
On Thursday, the meeting at 2:30 is optional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If only you want to participate and then get a point.
In the activities?
Yes. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a good day.
You too.
Good Wednesday.
I'll go play with my chinchilla, right?
Have fun. Think of us. Goodbye.
Yes. Okay, take care. All right, so people who need to talk to me, stay behind. Otherwise, I'll see you on Thursday.
Hello?
Okay. Can we speak now? That they can go first.
Let's see. Who wants to go first?
Oh, sorry, it was me.
Okay, go ahead, Vanessa.
Okay, so I haven't been able to really find a article that like speaks about like pedestrians and people on like bike lanes, like cyclists. But I've been able to find out with like cars. Can I make like a correlation to that? Can I add that or anything?
Okay, that's a possibility, but you'll be surprised, Vanessa, how much stuff there is. You probably are just not looking right. So what we could do is, this is what I would suggest you do. You should go, I mean, I can do it for you too, if nothing happens. You go to PsycInfo, right? There are 3 fields there. So let's, Victoria, you have a few minutes. Can you stand by?
Yeah, of course, Professor.
Okay, good. So let me open PsycInfo. Vanessa, I'll show you what I mean. All right. So that's not the one that I want. I want this one. So I'm opening the website for our library. You know how to do that. You don't need to show me. I don't need to show you how to do that, right? I'm going to go to PsycInfo, and then I'll share the screen so you can see what I'm doing. PsycInfo. There we go. I'm going to log in as me. Submit. Okay, so now let me share the screen with you guys, Vanessa in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Right, here we go. Okay, Vanessa, can you see the EBSCO?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. You see these three boxes at the top. So we have pedestrians, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna just type in pedestrian. I don't know, plural, singular, doesn't matter. Then we have bicycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bicycle. And this one, I'm not sure. So let's start with these two. So now if we click, we just leave it as select a field optional because we don't know where it will pop up. Well, let's see what's going to happen. Okay, well, it shows us one.
Yeah, that's what I saw last time. That's why I was like worried about it. I always.
So what can we do to improve? You said there is something with cars, right?
Yeah. No. Our study is like just pedestrians and pedestrians, cyclists, and like bike lanes and walking lanes. That's like our study.
Okay. Well, let's. Okay. Maybe we should say pedestrian distraction or something like that. Oops, distraction. Okay, so now we have 81.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so pedestrian distraction from smartphones. It's all about smartphones. So what we could do, we could say smartphone, and we could change our boolean to not. So now we want to see if there is anything about pedestrian distraction that has nothing to do with smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, because the smartphone is spelled. Oh, come on, people. All right. We are smarter than you. Smartphone, not. In both spellings. Let's see what will happen now. Okay. Pedestrian crossing behavior at mid-block crosswalks. Is mobile phones again, patterns of child pedestrian. So look, all I'm saying, Vanessa, you could play a little bit with the, so you have very specific terms, but try to make them a little more generic and play with these combinations.
So if I'm not able to find it, can I do something similar and make it kind of like a correlation?
Yes, absolutely. It could be, so it is about pedestrians veering into
bike lanes,
right? So it's about the behavior when people interfere with each other. So if you could come up with another layer of terms that would be more generic, you should be fine. And if you want, you can send me the article, the link to or the information about the article, and I can look at that. But as long as you can use it to compare to what you will be doing, at least it's, like you said, correlation, that's at some level, you'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Victoria.
Yes, Professor. Still recording. Okay, if I'm asked you to.
Yeah, turn it